So when you are ready to start writing your paper, you will want to look at your argument outline. There is a brief copy kind of outlined on your packet that you can reference. I also have argument outlines right here that you can pick up in the classroom. There are enough copies for everyone. You can write right on it as you plan and prepare, or you can go ahead and start writing in your document for Mrs. House that is uploaded in Google Classroom. When you go to get started, the first thing you want to think about is answering this question at the top. What factors impact your basic human rights? That is what we are working to answer with all of our case studies and our research. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this top chunk where it talks about the introduction. In English, you might talk to Mrs. House about how to grab your reader's attention and providing context or background information. You can see that right here. This is where you put your brief explanation. Here's where you explain what human rights violations are. But this part right here, this claim, is really the answer to your question up above of what factors impact your basic human rights. This will be the point of your essay for world history and English. Your answer will look something like what mine looks like here. I put the 3 factors that impact human rights are, and I chose governments, geography, and culture. That is what the rest of the class is going to be doing. You may have 3 different factors in here that influence or impact human rights. You do not have to use these 3. They are just options for you. So, those are my 3 arguments I'm going to make. Each one of them will make up a body paragraph. For an example, I started with governments. So if you look below in body paragraph number 1, I start by talking about how governments impact human rights. And when thinking about what I'm going to put in this paragraph, I looked through my 6 case studies and I grouped them. I have 6 case studies, and I believe of my case studies, 2 of them show how governments impact human rights, 2 of them showed how geography impacted human rights, and 2 of them showed how culture impacted human rights. So you can see how I've organized my paper. Right here, I start by saying my first factor is that governments impact human rights. And I write that right here. Governments impact human rights by, and I give 2 reasons why. Number 1, they choose to go to war and use the country's resources for war instead of supporting the lives of their people. The second one that I've chosen is forcing citizens to give up their property, jobs, and family to support the government. On the right, you can see where I've labeled that. This is the first way that governments impact human rights. This is the second way that governments impact human rights. You will look below. I will explain both of those more thoroughly and support them with my evidence from my research. So down here, I've chosen to use this first one. Down here, food shortages in Yemen prove that the government impacts human rights because, and this is where I'm going to explain from my evidence which human rights being violated. I'm going to explain how this right is being violated, and I'm going to include specific evidence from my research about Yemen. I'm also going to include in this argument that government, in this case, is responsible for this human rights violation, and I will also, again, have evidence to support that argument. Now, if you filled out your case study rubrics with all of the columns of information you should have, you will already have all of this information, reasons, and evidence ready to go for you. That is my first example for government. My second case study is down here. Here's where I talk about how the government is involved by forcing citizens to give up their property, jobs, and family to support the government. And I say that here, Pol Pot's communes in Cambodia prove that the government impacts human rights because, and I will again go into which human right is being violated by Pol Pot in Cambodia, and I'm going to talk about how his government, by forcing their citizens to give up their land and family and move to communes and support their government's goals, is also a violation of human rights. I'm going to talk about how the government is responsible. I'm going to use evidence for that. The key here is making sure that you have enough reason and evidence to support each of these. So Your body paragraph number 1 is probably going to be a pretty big bulk of information, as you have to include, this should be one of your factors over and over again, and here is where you're going to have at least 2 case studies to support the argument that you make up here, that governments impact human rights. If you have questions in addition to this, please feel free to come talk to Mrs. Lansing or email her anytime. I can help answer any remaining questions you might have.